I was moved as we were worshiping that last song or two that we realize the words that we say, and do we really mean the words that we say? I believe we do, to the point that we are able to. And we say, Lord, I love you. I'll do anything for you. And he knows we won't do anything for him. He knows there's some limitations that are beyond our ability. But he still loves us and encourages us to move into the realm where we will do those things that he calls us to do. I want to continue a little bit in what I shared with you the last couple times. I know, talking about money again. Jesus talked about it about 30% of the time, and this is the third time in a year that I've talked about it. So I just want to recap a little bit so that we're on the same page when I go on. The last Sunday in January, we talked about the Lord hearing the groanings of the Israelites because the Egyptians were holding them in bondage. And he said, I will remember my covenant with them, that I will deliver them and redeem them. And we've been talking about being redeemed by the Lord. That redemption is not just an Old Testament word, but it runs through the whole Bible, the Old and the New. That it means to buy something back and to free us from captivity by payment of ransom. We saw that the Lord said, sanctify me, the firstborn, the first offspring of every womb among the sons of Israel, both man and beast. It belongs to me. It belongs to him. We saw that the firstborn had to be sacrificed or redeemed. If it was a clean lamb, a clean firstborn, it was to be sacrificed. If it was unclean, it needed to be redeemed. And we see this in the picture of Jesus, the perfect sacrifice for us because we were the unclean that he redeemed. We find this principle of the first fruits throughout the Word. The first fruits have to do not just with money, but our time and our talents, who we are. We just sang some beautiful words about when we trust in you and with all our heart. That's what he's after. He's not about us giving what's left over after we've paid our bills, giving him the time after we've made our schedules, doing things for him after we've used them for our own benefit. He's talking about him being first. Our first fruits going to him. And of course, the tithe is part of that first fruit of showing him that we mean business. In Exodus, it says, you shall bring the choice fruits of your soil into the house of the Lord your God. And that comes with a promise, because in Proverbs it says, honor the Lord from your wealth and from the first of all your produce, so your barns will be filled with plenty, and your vats will overflow with new wine. When I share these things, we talk about the tithe and the sacrifice. This isn't legal. This is life to the Lord, and should be the life to us. We looked at Rahab in Jericho, and how that she was saved because of the scarlet thread hanging in the window, which is a picture of being redeemed. Jericho was the first city to be taken, and God said, Jericho's mine. You'll take no spoils from it. It's mine. And we saw that giving first Jericho and to us, or to him, and then we get the rest, that if we don't, that if we steal the tithe, if we steal the first fruit, it's a curse. And we saw, sure enough, that Achan took part of the tithe, took part of the spoils from Jericho and hid them in his tent. And Israel went out to battle to the next city, Ai. And what happened to Ai? They were soundly defeated by just a few people in comparison. And Joshua was beside himself. Lord, what's going on? And the Lord said, you stole from me. Look in Achan's tent. They went and they dealt with that situation, went back to Ai and had the victory. God's not after our money. He's after our hearts. And there's a string that goes from our heart here down to our wallet. We saw in Moses taking his son to be sacrificed on Mount Moriah. And then we look back at Genesis 14, where we saw the picture of Melchizedek, the king of Salem, a priest of the Most High God, bringing out bread and wine and blessing Abraham because of the victory he just had. And it says Abraham gave him a tenth of all. Really the first picture of tithing. We connect that with Hebrews, the New Testament. God said to Jesus, you are my son. Today I have begotten you. You are a priest forever, according to the order of Melchizedek. Today we bring our tithes to Jesus, the priest of the order of Melchizedek. A week later in February, we talked some more about this. We went into the New Testament and we saw that Jesus said, do not think I would come to abolish the law or the prophets. I did not come to abolish, but fulfill. Many people think because Jesus fulfilled the Old Testament law, he fulfilled our responsibility to give the first fruits, to give the tithe. And as we talked about then, but when we understand the law of grace, we find that misleading because the righteousness of grace always exceeds the righteousness of the law. Jesus said, whoever annuls one of these commandments or teaches others to do also shall be called least in the kingdom. Each time Jesus pointed to Old Testament, Old Covenant law, he then set a higher standard than the law was. The law says not to commit murder. He said, don't even hate your brother. The law says not to commit adultery. Jesus said, you shouldn't even look at a woman or a man lustfully. The righteousness of grace exceeds the righteousness of the law. And in fact, Jesus himself validated the tithe in the New Testament. We saw in Matthew 23, Jesus is admonishing the Pharisees when he says, woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, hypocrites, you pay tithe of mint and dill and cumin, and have neglected the weightier provisions of the law, justice and mercy and faithfulness. These are the things you should have done without neglecting the others. In other words, he's saying to the Pharisees, yes, you should tithe. That shouldn't even be an issue here. Your whole heritage has to do with that. I'm telling you, let's go on beyond that. Let's go beyond the law. Let's go on into greater things. We also saw that the word tithe in this passage has to do with the tenth, like it always does. That's what tithing means. But 10 is the number of testing. We saw 10 plagues in Egypt, 10 commandments. We saw the times that God tested Israel in the wilderness 10 times. How many times did God test Jacob's heart? 10 times. How many virgins were tested in preparedness in Matthew 25? That had oil for their lamps. God tests us with the tithe, with the first fruits. Are you really serious? That's what he's asking. But there's two sides to the test. He says in Malachi 3, will a man rob God? Yet you are robbing me. But you say, how? We have robbed you? In tithes and offerings. You are cursed with a curse. Remember Jericho? For you are robbing me, the whole nation of you. Bring the whole tithe, all 10%, into the storehouse, so there may be food in my house. And test me now in this. He tests us, and he said, now you test me. You bring the whole tithe in, and you test me. See if I won't perform. See if I won't bless you. The whole thing is to bless us. We try to make some kind of a legal thing, well, God's mad and he's mean and he wants to take my money. And God wants to bless us, and he's showing us ways to do that we can have so much more. The only place I know of in the Bible that God says, test me, is here. He said, see if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out a blessing until it overflows. I will rebuke the devourer, so it won't destroy the fruits of the ground. All the nations will call you blessed, for you shall be a delightful land, says the Lord of hosts. And that's kind of where we left off. And so now I want to talk about today the tithe and the offerings, mostly the offerings. And I want to start by telling you a story to help you understand or get an appreciation of what the first fruits mean to God. Let's say a man is leaving on a long trip, and he gets 3 of his friends or servants or slaves or whatever version of the Bible you're reading, and he said, okay, I'm going to give each of you guys $10,000 a month. All you have to do is give 1,000 of it to my bride. He goes on his way. After a couple of months, he calls his wife, how are things going? She said, well, the first man, he gives me $1,000 every month. The second man, he actually gives me $2,000 every month. I don't know why, but he's doing that. The third man, well, the first month he gave me $800, and the second month he gave me $300, and I haven't heard from him since. Now, as a husband who loves his wife, how do you think he feels? And what do you think he wants to do with these 3 men? Well, the first man fulfilled the obligation. That's good. He said, well done, good and faithful servant. The second man did even more than he needed to do. And the third man, he said, I'm going to take away that $10,000 and I'm going to give it to the second man. See, he who has, more shall be given. He who has not, even what he has should be taken away. Now, we talked about this a few weeks ago about the heart having the ability to receive and give. It's in your heart. And if you don't have it, you don't have it. But you can get it by committing to the Lord. Why is he going to give that extra $10,000 to the other guy? Because he trusts him. Because the man will do more than the basics. Because the man understands something about exceeding the requirements of the agreement. The righteousness of grace always exceeds the righteousness of the law. That is called the grace of giving. The grace of giving is giving more than the requirement. Jesus has gone away for a season, and he's telling the church, take care of my bride till I return. I'll give you all that you have. 10% of it is mine. And give it to my bride while I'm gone to take care of her. That's what he has told us. Those who obey will be blessed. Those who go above and beyond will be blessed even more. Now, Multiplication. Let's talk about multiplication. In Luke 9, Jesus fed the 5,000. It says he took the 5 loaves and the 2 fish that they had, and looking up to heaven, he blessed them, broke them, and kept giving to the disciples to set before the people, and they all ate, and they were all satisfied. The world is looking for ways to multiply money. Don't you know it? But the thing is, we know who really can multiply money. God can. He's the master of multiplication. So what did Jesus do with the loaves and fishes? Well, he took them and he blessed them. Something must be blessed to be multiplied. The way that our money is blessed and redeemed is by giving the first fruits. That blesses the other 90%. It removes the curse, blesses the rest of your finances, causes the Lord to rebuke the devourer, opens the windows of heaven. That's what that tithe does. That's what the first fruits do. And it sets you up for the abundance of the offering. The second thing Jesus did is he gave it away. Nothing can be multiplied that isn't given. You want to be blessed? Give something to God to work with. That's what Oral Roberts used to say that. Give God something to work with. Sow your seed. Now it may take a while to reproduce. Sometimes plants take a while to grow. You may not get it that afternoon, but you'll get it. God will see to it. If the disciples hadn't have given the food to Jesus to multiply, no one would have been fed. They had to have faith to do that. They had to have the faith to offer for the potential to be there to multiply. We see the grace of multiplication in action in the giving of offerings. The principle is just as powerful today as it was when Jesus fed the 5,000 plus wives and children. In light of this, let's talk a little bit about a word that we don't talk about very much, called mammon. Mammon. Matthew 6, no one can serve 2 masters, for either he will hate the one and love the other, or else he will be loyal to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve God and mammon. What is mammon? Mammon means riches. It's an attitude that says, man doesn't need God. We're self-sufficient. The spirit of mammon tries to tell us, you don't trust in God, you trust in your riches. They're the ones that get you out of trouble. Jesus is very clear, and he said, it's possible to serve mammon instead of the Lord, but it's impossible to serve them both at the same time. If you love one, you'll hate the other. There's no middle ground. Do you realize that money has a spirit on it? It's either the Spirit of God or the Spirit of mammon. Money that's submitted to God and to His purposes has the Spirit of God on it. The money that is not submitted to God has the spirit of mammon on it by default. Easy enough to understand. But that's why people think money can buy them happiness or fulfillment. We have to remember that mammon is a spirit of the world. And that spirit is a liar. Most people under the influence of the spirit of mammon are fearful about losing their money. Why? Because that's where their hope is. That's where their trust is. They trust in their money. What happens if I lose it all? Where will I be? If you trust in the Lord, you don't worry so much about your money, because that's not where your hope is. That's not where your trust is. Mammon promises those things that only God can really give us. Security, significance, identity, independence, power, freedom. Those are all things that God provides. But we try to get it by having enough money to buy our way through. Mammon says, well, I can insulate you from all the troubles of the world. All of life's problems. Money is the solution for everything. Mammon wants you to think, you know, if I just had more money, things would be different. Things would be better. Man, I could give to the kingdom. We could bless people. I could do all these things if I just had the money. But Jesus never told anyone that money was a solution to their problems. He's the solution to our problems. Amen. And when things are tight, and Mammon starts to say, well, if you just had money. Remember the widow's mite? Jesus was sitting one day watching the multitude put money into the treasury. And this little poor widow came and put 2 very small copper coins in the treasury. At the same time, the rich were putting all kinds of money in them. I don't know how much it would be, but certainly more than 2 cents worth. And Jesus saw this, and he called his disciples over. He said, come over here. That widow had put more into the treasury than all the rest. They all gave out of their wealth. She gave out of her poverty, and she put in everything she had to live on. Now that's trust. We sing about trust in the Lord. That's trust. When I was a younger pastor, I was administrator for my mentor, and I remember one day he called me in and he said, what's in the checkbook? And I said it was $300 or $400 or whatever. He said, okay, that's not enough. Give it away. He said, find people that need money and give it to them. So I went and wrote checks for all of it and mailed them off. That was the faith he had. Well, if $300 isn't going to do it, you might as well give it away and plant some seed and get something back. That's just good business. Why doesn't it matter how much that widow gave? Why did the 2 cents, why was it worth more than the thousands or millions that were given? Because what she gave was out of her heart, not just out of her purse. That's what he's looking for, what you're giving out of your heart. And whether we record it for you to get a statement at the end of the year or not, it doesn't matter what we think, it doesn't matter what I write down. God's the one that keeps track of it. The other reason it doesn't matter what she gave is what we've been talking about. He can multiply it anyway. The word says that the gold and silver are his, that the cattle on 1,000 hills is his. He's got the resources, and he can give more than we can imagine and not lose anything. He's an eternal source. Now, money and mammon are not synonymous. Money is not intentionally evil. One of the most frequently misquoted verses in the Bible is in 1 Timothy 6, which says, for the love of money is the root of all kinds of evil. Money is not the root of all kinds of evil, but the love of money is the root of all evil. When you begin to feel that financial pressure I was talking about, notice how the spirit of mammon tries to position itself and say, you either need God to work a miracle right now or you need some money. And that's a lie. Because whatever the issue is, we need God, not money. He can provide the money if that's what the issue is. But He's the solution, not how much we've got in the bank. Mammon has some friends that Mammon works well with. In Romans 14, it says, blessed are those who don't feel guilty for doing something they've decided is right. That's the word. Don't feel guilty for doing something you believe is right. Because the first friend of Mammon is the spirit of poverty. The spirit of poverty will cause you to be ashamed of the blessings of God. I know a lady here in town that gets a new vehicle every year. She gets the same color, the same make, because she doesn't want her neighbors to know she got a new vehicle. She's a Christian lady. She doesn't have anything to be ashamed of. In fact, if you are someone that is a good steward, that you give, that you tithe, that you do what you should have more than anyone else. That's your inheritance, part of your inheritance. That's just reaping what you've sown. That's a basic principle of the Word. That's nothing to be ashamed of. The more you give away, the more God returns. Is there anything in your life that God can do that you should be ashamed of? God wants to bless you. Should you be ashamed of that? Now, someone may want to make you feel that way, may be jealous of you. But in Proverbs 10 it says that the blessings of God makes you rich, and He adds no sorrow to it. There's nothing to be ashamed of. He doesn't hurt you because you have something good. In fact, if it's good, it came from Him. Another little friend of Mammon is the opposite, the spirit of pride. And that's the spirit that says, well, you've earned this. You've worked hard. It's all up to you. You did it. God didn't have anything to do with this. Some people are proud to be poor. Remember there was a song came out years ago, I was country before it was cool or something. You know, and I know there's a restaurant or was down south called Poor Boys. I don't know if it was about the sandwich or about just being, well, we're poor old country folk, we don't have nothing here. And there's a pride in that. That's nonsense. That's not the Lord. That's some religious badge of honor, but it's not the Spirit of God. The spirit of pride sounds like the opposite of the spirit of poverty, but the two are the same. They get us to focus on stuff instead of God. The spirit of pride says, wealth comes from hard work. The spirit of poverty says, wealth comes from the devil. The spirit of pride says you should be proud of what you have. The spirit of poverty says you should be ashamed of what you have. It's all about what you have. It's not about God. The key to staying God-focused with our finances is what? Put God first. Have a heart of gratitude. Once the spirits of pride and poverty no longer have influence in your life, you'll be free to recognize and enjoy the blessings God has given you. Be free in them. Enjoy them. Now sometimes God may give you what you pray for to show you that you don't want it. That something comes before him. And I've been waiting for a year to find a reason to tell this story. I finally got to it. It's my Corvette story. Back years ago, and growing up, I was a car guy. Loved cars. My identity was in the car I drove, which is not too uncommon in those days. I think things are a little different now, but... And one day I was reading a hot rod magazine, and on the cover was this Corvette Stingray. It was black, and I fell in love with that car. And I said, Lord, I really would like that car. I mean, I really would like that car. But I don't want it if you don't want me to have it. But I really love that car. So I decided, okay, to be sure that it's the Lord, I'll put out a fleece. Lord, if I can find a 63 to a 67, that was the body style of the fastback Corvette Stingray.
Split window.
Split window was 63. 64 and more were the solid window.
Right.
Said, Lord, if so happens I come across a black or a red 63 to 67 Corvette Stingray, big block 4-speed, for under $4,000, I know it's your will. Well, that's a pretty good fleet. And I mean, this was a few years ago. $4,000 would have been a whole lot more. That car right now is probably worth $100,000. You know what? He gave me one. He found one. 1967, 427, 435 horsepower from the factory, solid lifter cam, 4-speed. The original purchaser of the car, he ordered it, he set it up to race it, he blueprinted, balanced the engine, had it all set up to run, and boy, could it run with that fiberglass body. The second owner owned Flawless Auto at that time. The paint he put on that car, it was black and it went forever. It was the most beautiful car. So beautiful, so powerful, the ultimate car. And it was $4,000. I had the car 8 months. There's a verse in Psalms, I think it's in Psalms 108. And it says this, and God granted them the desires of their heart and sent leanness to their soul. And that's what happened. I love that car, but it dealt with something in my soul I couldn't get around. And I couldn't get away from it till I sold it. Now when I went to sell it, I'd spent $4,000 on it, so I thought, well, I should be able to get $4,500 for it. I'll put it in the paper for $4,500. 2 weeks went by, not a bite, nothing. So I was praying, I thought, well, Lord, obviously you want me to make more money on this. So I put it back in the paper for $5,000 for a couple of weeks. And then in prayer, the Lord was clear to me. He said, no, the only benefit, the only profit you're going to get from owning this car is the lesson I'm teaching you. And I put it in the paper for $3,000 and sold it within a few days. I still love cars, but they don't take the place in my heart they used to. I can enjoy them and walk away from them. I don't have to own them anymore. I don't have to have the nicest one in town. I enjoy nice cars, but they're not God to me. He's first. And he taught me that very clearly. What is our motivation for giving? In James it says, you ask and do not receive because you ask with wrong motives, so that you may spend it on your pleasures. I've heard many preachers over the years teach, give so you'll get. The more you give, the more you get. Have faith, give, and get what you can. In reality, it shouldn't be our motivation. It should be just a byproduct. Our motivation isn't to give to get. Our motivation is to get to give. Our Heavenly Father is a giver. He's a gracious giver. He's an abundant giver. He lavishes things upon us, especially those things that we can handle. We don't give to get, we get to give. It's an honor to support our King and to be like Him. Give to those that ask of you. Give to those who can't pay you back. Give love to those who don't deserve it. Give mercy to those who wrong you. Give the kind of treatment that you hope to receive from others. Give, give, give. And by the way, when you do, your Heavenly Father will make sure that you get much more in return. Amen. As a byproduct of your obedience and your love to Him. At the heart of God is the most gracious, generous giver we'll ever know. He wants us to follow that example. We don't have to ask God how much to give for the tithe, and we know how much to give, 10%. We do need to ask Him sometimes how much to give as an offering. You know, just in passing, in the Old Testament, the priests, the tribe of Levite, their inheritance was a tithe. The 12 tribes went into the land. Each of those tribes got land except the Levites. They got the tithe. And so that was their inheritance. It was theirs. You know what paid for the temple and all the other stuff? Offerings. Temple tax. Different things. Now, the Levites have the ability to discern what they want to do with that. So don't get ahead of me here. I'm not going where you think I'm going. But we need to understand that when we go to give offerings, it is valid to say, Lord, how much should I give? Put on my heart what you need, what you want from me, and ask Him to give you an amount. When I remember, it used to be almost every time that we'd be faced with an offering, I'd have something in my mind, and I'd turn to Terry, and I'd say, what do you think? And she'd give me that same amount. I don't know how many times that ever happened to us. Because God wanted us to give a certain amount. Sometimes you give out of your abundance. Sometimes you give out of your poverty. That's when the faith comes in. It's like giving the tithe before you pay your bills. That's faith. But He's only trying to get your heart to show you, I'll take care of you. Do you trust me? We were singing about trust. Do you trust me? Test me now in this and see if I won't open the windows of heaven for you. The reward comes because we allow God to do work in our hearts in the area of our giving. Now I want to end this by telling you something that you don't know. Maybe you know it. You can take it with you. We've all heard the stories of the guy. Now, when they go to bury me, just before they put the dirt on, throw my money in, and in the grave. And of course, the smart guys, they just write a check and throw it in there. But you can take it with you. There is a place of giving eternally. Do not lay up for yourselves treasures on earth where moth and rust destroy and where thieves break in and steal. Lay up for yourself treasures in heaven where neither moth nor rust destroys and where thieves do not break in and steal. In Luke it says, and I say to you, make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon, that when you fail, they may receive you into an everlasting home. What's he talking about? Well, there's a long story behind it. The guy was not doing well by his master, and the master comes and said, okay, we're going to make accounts here. And the guy went out and he said, well, you owe my master so much here, just give me this much. And he started bartering with these people to get the money and to give to his master. And this comes up. Make friends for yourselves by unrighteous mammon, that when you fail, they may receive you into everlasting life. In other words, we should use our earthly possessions to benefit others, so that when we die and leave our possessions behind, we'll be welcomed in heaven. We're instructed to use our money for that which is eternal. What's eternal? What's eternal in this room? People. That's what's eternal. We're to use our money for people. The only lasting things we encounter every day is people. The human soul is eternal. If we use our money to bring people to Christ, they can welcome us in heaven. Think about that. It doesn't say the money will welcome you, it says they will welcome you. Friends you make because you gave mammon. Unrighteous even can go to pay and support that which brings people to Christ. I want my money to be used to help people, to love people, to feed people, to care for people. Just as Jesus turned water into wine, God can turn money into souls. Can you imagine walking down the streets of gold? Someone comes up and says, I know you don't know me, but God told me that for what you gave is the reason someone came to me and told me about Jesus, and I'm saved and I'm here because of you. What would that mean? Walking around heaven. What a glorious day that will be. And to know that your new best friend, that because you gave some money, gave some an offering somewhere, that God turned it into gold for them in eternal life. Let us pray. Father, your word says that it's a terrifying thing to fall into the hands of the living God. All this talk about returning tithes and giving offerings and breaking curses and sacrifices for redemption can be intimidating. But you are a loving Father who is showing us your love beyond our understanding into abundant life. You're calling us to believe in you, to believe in your word, to trust you and not material riches, to honor you, to obey you, and see if you won't break the curses in our lives. Rebuke the devourer for us and open the windows of heaven and bless us beyond our greatest